Hello guys, welcome back. And today I'm going to be doing my 2019 NHL Stanley Cup Playoff Predictions. The 2019 Stanley Cup Playoffs are here, so what does my bracket end up looking like, and which team do I predict to win the Stanley Cup this year? Watch till the end to find out. But the Stanley Cup playoffs this year are going to be very, very exciting. There's a lot of matchups and a lot of teams that I personally am definitely looking forward to. A lot of teams right now are kind of bundled together at a point where I can see a lot of different teams winning the Stanley Cup, and of course, that's what makes these predictions so much fun. Now, we're first going to start out with the Western Conference and make our way into the East, but for the first playoff matchup, we have the Calgary Flames versus the Colorado Avalanche. The Calgary Flames being the #1 team in the Western Conference, and the Colorado Avalanche being the second wildcard team. And this matchup is very, very interesting. I can honestly see both teams having the advantage here. Both teams have been good in the regular season, especially lately, as the Colorado Avalanche have been very hot as of late. I could see, honestly, both teams winning this. I could see how Calgary could win it. I could see how Colorado would win it, but in the end, in my personal opinion, I think Colorado takes the advantage. Now, you might start to see a theme with my predictions. I predicted a lot of underdogs to win some playoff matchups, and the Colorado Avalanche are the first to do so. Now, I predict them to win versus Calgary in 7 games to just barely go on to the second round. And in my personal opinion, I feel like the Calgary Flames, the demise of them will be the goaltending and the inconsistency. It looks like Mike Smith will be the goaltending starter for the playoffs, and while David Rittich has had a decent year, he's been really meh as of late, and I just don't see how the goaltending can really get hot into the playoffs. I don't see how Mike Smith does that much in the playoffs, and to me, Calgary Flames will have the offense, they'll have the defense, but the goaltending will come up just short. Between the San Jose Sharks and the Vegas Golden Knights, San Jose being second in the Pacific Division and Vegas being third in the division. And this one should be a very fun series to watch. Since Vegas has come into the league, they've had a great rivalry with the San Jose Sharks. Of course, they've met up in last year's playoffs in round 2. That was an excellent series, and I see that being the same with this year's round 1. Now, when it comes to the winners of this series, it was super hard to predict, but I feel like the Vegas Golden Knights will get the upper hand. Now, in my opinion, I see the Vegas Golden Knights winning this series in 7 games, being a very hard-fought, battled series the Vegas Golden Knights will just escape from. Again, it'll be a very entertaining series, but I feel like the San Jose Sharks will fall a little bit short because of some of the goaltending, the same issues that Calgary might have. With Martin Jones, I thought he was going to be pretty solid this season, but he's been the exact opposite, especially lately, where he's just been horrendous. Aaron Dell hasn't been too much better. When it comes to the San Jose goaltending, if it doesn't get hot at the right time, I don't see San Jose doing too much, even though they have that electric offense, that amazing defense with Erik Karlsson and Brent Burns. Those are some excellent things going for San Jose, but I feel like the goaltending is just not strong enough to get past a good team like the Vegas Golden Knights. Now, the third series is between the Nashville Predators and the Dallas Stars, and this one should be very entertaining to watch. As me being a Dallas Stars fan, I'm hoping we do get the win, but otherwise, I still think it'll be a very entertaining battle between both teams. Nashville being the winners of the Central Division, and Dallas being the first wildcard team. I feel like they kind of have a little bit of a rivalry brewing, especially in the last year. There's been some heated games between the two. Of course, they'll be meeting up in the Winter Classic next year, which I'll probably be going to, which is super fun, but this is the start of a big rivalry, I think, between these two teams. I think it'll be close. I think Dallas Stars will put up a fight, but I feel like in the end, the Nashville Predators will be advancing to round 2. Now, I see the Nashville Predators winning this series in 6 games, being a very tough battle and a close battle between both teams. But again, the Nashville Predators, I still think will get the edge in this series. And the Dallas Stars, I think, will put up a decent fight. I still think they would have a better chance to getting round 2 if they faced Calgary or if they faced Winnipeg. But Nashville will be a great series, a great rivalry series. I still think the Dallas Stars will make it competitive. But of course, the Nashville Predators advancing on to round 2, I think they're definitely hungry for that. Now, moving on to the last first-round series in the Western Conference, it's between the Winnipeg Jets and the St. Louis Blues. And this series has so much potential. I think as not a rivalry series, but a pretty close one at that. I think it'll have a lot of fantastic games, maybe some classic games, but I feel like it'll be a very good series, but the St. Louis Blues will get the advantage in the end. I see them going to round 2, even though Winnipeg has that lethal home ice advantage. Now, in this series, I see the St. Louis Blues winning in 6 games, advancing on to round 2. And with the Winnipeg Jets, I really can't pinpoint something that I don't really like about them. It's just weird. They just seem off this season. While they did have a decent first half, since the trade deadline, since getting Hayes, I just have not been impressed with what I've seen goaltending, forward-wise, defensively. Overall, from what I've been seeing with Winnipeg, especially lately, they aren't giving me the biggest hope that they'll be a true Stanley Cup contender this season. Even if they are on paper getting guys like Kevin Hayes, I just do not feel right with the Winnipeg Jets. I don't feel like they're able to take that next step versus teams like St. Louis versus teams like Nashville, and I feel like something is off with them to a point where they'll end up losing in the first round, which will be a big disappointment to a lot of Jets fans. So in the second round of the Western Conference, we'll have the Predators and the Blues facing off. Same thing with the Golden Knights and the Colorado Avalanche. Now, moving on to the Eastern Conference, and the first playoff matchup being between the Columbus Blue Jackets and the Tampa Bay Lightning. This series is going to be very interesting for both teams, honestly, to see how well they perform. Now, for a Tampa Bay Lightning's perspective, they tied the most wins in NHL history for a team in the regular season, which is just insane. And for the Columbus Blue Jackets, they had that brilliant deadline, getting Duchesne, getting Dzingel, getting some extra parts. It's really going to be interesting to see how both teams perform, and obviously Columbus getting that amazing trade deadline. They've gotten some unluckiness playing a team as good as Tampa Bay Lightning, but they're going to have to put up to that task. And I feel like the Columbus Blue Jackets will put up a decent fight, but the Tampa Bay Lightning will eventually win in the end. And in the end, I predict the Tampa Bay Lightning to win this series in 6. I see Sergei Bobrovsky and the Columbus Blue Jackets maybe stealing a couple of games in this series, but in my personal opinion, I think the Tampa Bay Lightning are too good to be out in the first round. And while I am predicting some underdogs in these playoffs, the Columbus Blue Jackets are not one of them. Now moving on to one of the most anticipated playoff matchups in this NHL playoffs, the Boston Bruins versus the Toronto Maple Leafs, and this series I think will be a classic once again. Again, last year they faced each other again, they faced each other back in 2013. It is starting to become like a broken record at this point, the Bruins obviously facing the Maple Leafs, but I feel like this year will have a lot more implications, a lot more stories, and even last year. It's almost completely different storyline for both teams. Both teams haven't been the greatest in the last couple of weeks. I would say Toronto looked a lot more human in the last couple of weeks, but I feel like this will still be, once again, an amazing series between two teams that honestly hate each other. It'll be a series to watch and a fun one at that, but in the end, while it might be an unpopular pick right now, I see the Toronto Maple Leafs going to round 2. And in this series between the Boston Bruins and the Toronto Maple Leafs, I see the Maple Leafs winning in 6 games. And I know what some people might be thinking. Toronto hasn't won versus Boston last year and 2013, before that really. And yes, you are correct there. But this time around, I think it might be different. Now, when it comes to Toronto Maple Leafs, I haven't really been impressed by their month of March and kind of in April. They've been kind of slow and steady, pretty much a 500 record. But I feel like with the Toronto Maple Leafs, they have some offense, they have some defense, they have some goaltending when Freddie Anderson is healthy. But I think all will come together, at least in the first round in this series. And I feel like with the Boston Bruins, they haven't looked the greatest in the last couple of weeks. I haven't been too impressed with what I've seen from them right now. And when it comes to the Boston Bruins, I feel like obviously they've had this advantage versus Toronto Maple Leafs for so long in these playoff series. I feel like this is the series that Toronto finally exercises their demons and finally gets past the Boston Bruins. Now, some people obviously will not like that prediction. If you would have asked me a couple of weeks ago, I would have said Boston would win that series 100%, but I do feel different now. Now, the defense has been getting a little bit more healthy steadily and slowly, but they've been getting there. The goaltending with Freddie Anderson, if he's healthy and ready to go, I think he could do some damage. And the Toronto Maple Leafs forward group plays like the Toronto Maple Leafs forward group that we've seen in the past and seen them live up to. I feel like they would have a solid chance to not just be competitive with the Boston Bruins, but to win that series and go far in the playoffs. And I feel like the Toronto Maple Leafs will finally realize that 5th gear in the playoffs that they haven't had before. And when it comes to the Toronto Maple Leafs, obviously they've choked time and time again versus Boston Bruins, but I feel like this year, finally, will be different for them. Now, moving on to the next series, this one being a very interesting one between the Washington Capitals and the Carolina Hurricanes. Washington winning the Metropolitan Division, Carolina getting that first wild card spot. In my personal opinion, this will be a very fun series to watch. Carolina making the playoffs for the first time since 2009. It's really fun to see, and I'm going to be really interested to see how Carolina performs in these playoffs against a pretty great opponent in the Washington Capitals. But the Washington Capitals going to want to get to that back-to-back Stanley Cup rings. They're going to want to get past the Carolina Hurricanes, and I think in the end, they will advance to round 2. Now, that's not a knock on the Carolina Hurricanes at all. I think they are a decent team. They made the playoffs. They obviously are a pretty great one. I'm just not sure how exactly they're going to perform in the playoffs, how well they will do. Though, personally, I really do want to see them do a storm surge in the playoffs, so I'm hoping they do win a game at home. But I feel like it'll be a close series that Washington will win in 7 games. It'll be a close one between two teams that will eventually hate each other in the end. But I feel like for the Washington Capitals, they'll have that drive a lot more than Carolina does right now. Now moving on to the first round matchup in the Eastern Conference, the New York Islanders and the Pittsburgh Penguins, and this one should be, again, fun to watch, mostly like all the other playoff matches. But when it comes to New York and the Pittsburgh Penguins, again, I feel like this will be a good metropolitan matchup between two teams that obviously do not love each other too much. And when it comes to the series, I feel like the New York Islanders, since they've had such a great season, I think they will have a chance. But in the end, I think the Pittsburgh Penguins, since being so hot lately and since being the freaking Pittsburgh Penguins, I think they will advance to round 2 of the Stanley Cup playoffs. Now for me, this wouldn't be my ideal result. I don't really like the Penguins that much. I would love to see the New York Islanders complete the Cinderella story and go on to the second round. But I feel like in the end, the Pittsburgh Penguins will have more experience than the much hotter team right now. The New York Islanders haven't had the greatest last month and a half, I would say. But the Pittsburgh Penguins are prepped for the playoffs. They have a lot to prove since getting beaten by the Washington Capitals in last year's playoffs. And I feel like they'll have that hunger to get past in the second round and to be able to get there. I feel like they'll get past the New York Islanders, and New York Islanders won't give up too much of a fight. Now moving on to the second round and moving on to the Western Conference second round matchups, we have the Nashville Predators versus the St. Louis Blues. And this matchup will be very fun to watch. Again, two Central Division teams that will hate each other in the end. When it comes to the St. Louis Blues and the Nashville Predators, this will be a big battle of goaltending, defense, and forward group. Nashville, I would say, has the better roster on paper, but St. Louis has a little bit of the magic. And in the playoffs, I think the magic will come through. In my personal opinion, I feel like the St. Louis Blues will advance to the Western Conference Final over the Nashville Predators. Now the next series in the second round between the Vegas Golden Knights and the Colorado Avalanche will also be a pretty fun one. Vegas Golden Knights, again, wanting to get back to the Stanley Cup Final. Colorado Avalanche having something to prove after beating the Calgary Flames. In my personal opinion, this one will be a pretty fun one to watch. Both teams are highly energetic. Both teams in the playoffs will likely hate each other. But in the end, I see the Vegas Golden Knights winning this series and it not being too close in the end. And in this series between Colorado and Vegas, I see the Vegas Golden Knights winning this series in 5 games. With the Colorado Avalanche winning against the Calgary Flames in my bracket, I feel like they'll kind of run out of steam a little bit versus the Vegas Golden Knights, and the Vegas Golden Knights will just grind them down to a pulp as they continue to get through games and get wins. And in my personal opinion, I feel like the Vegas Golden Knights just have the better roster on paper, and in the playoffs, we've seen them go far last year too. Moving on to the second round of the Eastern Conference, and this second round matchup would just be so good. Now, the Tampa Bay Lightning and the Toronto Maple Leafs, who I predict to match up in the second round, and this playoff series, if it doesn't end up happening, would be so good. And these two teams, talent-wise, are pretty competitive. It would just be pure bliss to watch these teams battle it out on the ice in almost a 7-game playoff series. And I feel like it will be a pretty close one. Again, Tampa Bay being the best team in the league by a long shot, I wouldn't give up on Toronto, and I still think they would put up a very solid fight. And a good enough fight, in my personal opinion, to win this series. And I feel like the Toronto Maple Leafs will end up spoiling Tampa Bay Lightning's party in 6 games. And while it might seem crazy, I'm predicting Toronto Maple Leafs to win against the Tampa Bay Lightning and advance to the Eastern Conference Final. And this, again, might seem crazy. The Tampa Bay Lightning have tied the Detroit Red Wings for the most wins in NHL history when it comes to regular season, and they've had an unbelievable season, and I would love for them to be able to win the Stanley Cup. But I don't think this is their year. It might be next year, it might be the year after that, but I feel like the Toronto Maple Leafs will be determined to be able to get to the Eastern Conference Final, and I think they will versus the Tampa Bay Lightning. Now moving on to the other exciting second round matchup, this one between the Washington Capitals and the Pittsburgh Penguins. And this one, once again, the battle between maybe the biggest rivalry in the NHL right now. It'll be another exciting series. Again, Washington got the upper hand and exercised their demons in last year's NHL playoffs, disappointing the Pittsburgh Penguins on what would have been a pretty solid run for them. But for the Washington Capitals and the Pittsburgh Penguins, again, this one will be a good rematch. Once again, these two have battled in the playoffs for so many times now, but it always seems to be exciting. I feel like that this year it will still be the case. Now, in my personal opinion, the Washington Capitals once again won the Stanley Cup last year, but this year, I think it might be over in the second round, and I feel like the Pittsburgh Penguins will advance to the Eastern Conference Final. And I see this series being very close in the end. I see Pittsburgh winning this series in 7 games, being a very close series, but I still think the Pittsburgh Penguins will have a lot of determination from last year's NHL playoffs, where of course Washington was beating them in the second round and ended up advancing to the Stanley Cup Final and winning against Vegas. I feel like Pittsburgh wants to go on another run, maybe not win the Stanley Cup, but wants to get past Washington. And of course, obviously both teams hate each other, but I feel like the Pittsburgh Penguins get the last laugh in this year's NHL playoffs. Now, heading into the Western Conference Final between the St. Louis Blues and the Vegas Golden Knights, this is going to be a very fun series to watch if it ends up happening. Both teams will hate each other. But when it comes to this series, I think it'll be very interesting. Of course, Vegas, being the expansion team, they want to be able to make the Stanley Cup final once again and win it this time. St. Louis, never even winning the Stanley Cup in their franchise history, they want to do it now. And I feel like this series will be a battle between two very solid teams, a very solid Western Conference once again, Vegas making it once again. But I feel like in the end, the St. Louis Blues will be on to the Stanley Cup final. Now, I see the St. Louis Blues winning this series in 6 games. I see it being a very close series. Vegas having a very solid series as well, but the St. Louis Blues carrying it because of goaltending. I see Jordan Binnington having an amazing season, the defense carrying the load as well, and the offense being very solid and very clutch. And in the end, while it might seem improbable, I feel like the St. Louis Blues will be advancing the Stanley Cup final in what seems like the first time in forever. Now that leaves us with the Eastern Conference Final, and man, what an Eastern Conference Final it would be between the Toronto Maple Leafs and the Pittsburgh Penguins. So much skill on both sides, it would just be absolutely insane. You have Phil Kessel with the Pittsburgh Penguins, maybe want to get some revenge against the Toronto Maple Leafs, the Toronto Maple Leafs being that super young team, and it got a lot of storylines on both sides. It would be an epic Eastern Conference Final and would be one of the best we've seen in the last few years, and there has been some fantastic ones. But between the Toronto Maple Leafs and the Pittsburgh Penguins, it was hard to really determine a winner of this series. But in the end, while it might seem a little bit crazy, I predict the Toronto Maple Leafs to make the Stanley Cup Final. And this series just could go both ways, but I do predict Maple Leafs to get it done and win in 6 games. And when it comes to the Maple Leafs, I see the offense being superior over the Pittsburgh Penguins. I see the defense being clutch while the Pittsburgh Penguins defense kind of choking up a little bit. And while I see Matt Murray having a very strong playoffs, I'm not sure how well he will do against the Toronto Maple Leafs. But I feel like the Toronto Maple Leafs will have a full team effort. Everybody will be producing and everybody will be playing well. And I feel like Toronto Maple Leafs, to get past Pittsburgh, that's going to be one of the requirements for them to play as good as they can against a team as good as the Pittsburgh Penguins, especially in the spotlight of the Eastern Conference Final. And for a team that hasn't made the Stanley Cup Final in so long, I think they will get it done this year. Which leaves us to the very interesting Stanley Cup Final between the St. Louis Blues and the Toronto Maple Leafs. And this one, I kind of wanted to happen because it would just be such a classic series, such an eventful series. The St. Louis Blues never even winning a Stanley Cup in their history. The Toronto Maple Leafs not being able to win the Stanley Cup since 1967. And it would be such an entertaining, unique series that would feature so much stars, so much history, and so many epic battles. And honestly, I'm not even a St. Louis Blues fan, I'm a lot more of a Maple Leafs fan, but this would just be so fun to watch for both teams, how they get here and how they would play, because it would just be such a great battle between both teams that honestly do deserve it right now. And when I ended up making this bracket between the St. Louis Blues and the Toronto Maple Leafs, I was going back and forth. Should I vote on Toronto? Should I vote on St. Louis? It was really a tough one to predict, but in the end, I think it will be a close series. It will go 6 games, but the winner in the end will be the St. Louis Blues. And while it might seem crazy, it might seem impossible, I see the St. Louis Blues coming out of the Western Conference, the Toronto Maple Leafs coming out of the Eastern Conference, and then battling it out for 6 games, but I see the St. Louis Blues winning it in the end and being the 2018-2019 Stanley Cup champions. And as a Dallas Stars fan, it definitely hurts to say that, but I feel like the St. Louis Blues will have an excellent chance to not just get out of the second round, the third round, the Stanley Cup final, but to win the Stanley Cup, ultimately to Toronto's demise, but still Toronto having a very successful season and a very successful playoffs. And it obviously would have been easy to pick a team like Tampa or Boston or Nashville to win the Stanley Cup. With this year's playoffs, I see it being a little bit of an opposite story to where we see some upsets. We see some teams that you wouldn't expect winning go far in the playoffs. And I feel like that will be a theme of this year's playoffs, unlike last year where we didn't see any upsets virtually at all. But this year I think will be different, and we'll see a lot of teams have some successful playoffs, including the St. Louis Blues and obviously the Toronto Maple Leafs. But of course, with this video, I want to hear your guys' thoughts down in the comments down below. So, let me know, what do you think about my Stanley Cup bracket and my playoff predictions? What do you think about me predicting St. Louis to win the Stanley Cup over the Toronto Maple Leafs? And of course, the big question onto you guys. Who do you see as the Stanley Cup favorites? Who do you see as the Stanley Cup final? And who do you see coming out of the West, the East, and ultimately, who do you see winning the Stanley Cup in these year's playoffs? But if you guys want some more Grav videos just like this one, you can click on this card right here to watch my video on my final NHL award picks for the 2018-2019 season. But that will be it for today, guys. If you guys did enjoy, make sure you like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell if you haven't already. Again, comment down below your thoughts on my 2018 playoff predictions and what your predictions will be for these playoffs. And I'll see you guys in the next video or stream. Goodbye.